this morning. We're going to start in Exodus 20. If you want to go ahead and click there, you're welcome to. But I want to ask, we normally, with this curriculum, there's a video that we watch sometimes, and then we have a discussion about the content based on the video. My video isn't working this morning, which I didn't try super hard because I was a little torn on whether we were going to spend time with it anyway. So let me just quickly remind you where we were last week and then catch you up to where we are this week. Last week, we talked in the kids program, and then in here, we talked about Moses. The little kids last week talked about baby Moses in the river. The bigger kids talked about the plagues. And so we kind of hit the spot in the middle. We talked about the burning bush. We talked about God calling Moses to this really great purpose. We also talked about how we respond to God calling us. We tried to explore the idea of God calling us, period. And what that means for us and what it looks like, what it sounds like, what it feels like, and then how we respond. We also tried to touch on two other things. We tried to touch on why we don't respond sometimes. And we also tried to talk a little bit about free will and about the idea that God calls us to moments, but we have the ability to reject those moments and to not engage in the way that God fully intended. So God has called Moses to free his people. We went through the plagues with the kids, so we're gonna pick up today a little bit later in the story. The Israelites have been freed. They are now in a moment that is one of the most culturally well-known moments in the Bible. So when I say culturally well-known, there are a few biblical, I think, flagpoles that you don't have to have any biblical knowledge about to know. There's a few references. With secular culture, regardless of their church upbringing, if you say Adam and Eve, they understand the biblical reference of that. You say the Ten Commandments, I think you get the same. So that's where we're going to be today. We're going to be in the Ten Commandments, the Israelites' response to Moses, and we're going to talk a little bit about how to apply some of that stuff today. One of the most interesting things to me about this section of Scripture is how often we relegate this story to kids' church. Or we relegate it to a moment in passing, but we don't often pause on the exchanges and what happens in this story. So before we get into it, though, I have a question just to get you thinking. And if you are new in here this morning, or if this is your first time, I really lean heavily on you. So if you have a thought, please feel free to speak out. My first question for you today: how has your perception of God changed over time? Your perception of what he is, of what he wants. How has that changed from when you were a little kid to now? The way you viewed God. How has it changed from when you were a kid to now? How did your... Go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to say, when I was a kid, my perception was this white-bearded man that looked up in the clouds and that he watched over us and judged us.
Yeah.
And you're supposed to be good because he's watching all the time.
Yeah.
And
Like Santa Claus.
Santa Claus kind of thing. And he was in the clouds and he lived up there and he watched over us. And so that was my perception. But my kid said something to me that I thought was interesting.
Okay.
My son, he's 11 now, but when he was like 6 or 7, him and my other children, older children, were in the back of the car, and they said, "Daniel, God doesn't look like Dr. Karam." Dr. Karam is our pediatrician. And they were having this discussion about how, well, he does. We thought he looked like Dr. Karam. And I was going, why do he look like Dr. Karam? Because he heals people. And so in their mind, Dr. Karam was like what God must be like because he heals people and we pray for him. So I just was listening to that conversation and I was like, my kid's perception is not the white-bearded man in the clouds. We pray, we do what we believe in. So at our house, we are praying for sick people and we are wanting to heal them. But then as I've gotten older and we have a lot of conversation, it's like him. It's more of an entity, an energy. It's not this necessarily white-bearded man. It's more of it's something that's there, but it's something that we can interact with spiritually through.
Yeah, but that picture...
Anyway, but I just thought I would share that's what my kids were having.
I'm with you. Well, and that's where I think a lot of our kids have a visual representation. I'm with you. I grew up with the white-bearded picture. But I think a lot of kids, you have to grab onto something. We have to conceptualize it in some way, and that's a really easy way to do it. All right, so I want to ask a question. Maybe make a point first and then ask a question. I think for a lot of us, whether it's because of the way that it was taught to us as kids or just the way that we perceived it as kids. I think there's a tendency for us as humans to view God as kind of a cosmic killjoy. As a being that is waiting, we talk the Santa Claus picture, waiting for you to do something wrong and to put you on the naughty list, waiting for a reason to send you a lump of coal. As this very judgmental, good is acceptable, but bad is immediately punished. And there's this very judgmental picture and judgmental view of what God is. My first question is this. I think there's a very strong cultural response to our faith system that says that it is built around a very judgmental God. If we view God as a cosmic killjoy, my next question for you is, how does this impact our relationship to Him? And how does this impact our response to the Word? If you view God as being judgment and judgment only, and waiting to cast you out for your mistakes, how does that change the way you view Him, your relationship with Him, and your response to what you see in the Bible?
Well, one response is that I'm judgmental towards other people.
Go ahead, Doug. Keep talking.
Well, I mean, just if I feel like he's judging me, I notice that I get more critical of other people.
Oh.
Just I see this attitude, where there's kind of a condescending sort of thing, where hey, he's the big judge up there or something, and I'm one of his kids. Well, we know the truth. We got the truth right here in the Bible. The truth gets really kind of harsh. Instead of speaking truth in love, it's kind of judgmental.
So viewing God as judgmental and judgmental only creates judgment in you and causes you to judge others. Doug, that's powerful, man. Thanks. What else? How does viewing God as the cosmic killjoy here to judge you no matter what, how does that change your perspective on who He is? And how does that change in particular your response to His Word?
It steals your hope. It took, for me, growing how I grew up, it was hellfire and brimstone, and you better walk the line. I mean, honestly.
I think a lot of us grew up that way.
And now, and it was, I had no hope. No matter what I did, it was not going to be good enough. Or, the rules changed all the time as to what was acceptable. And now I understand that the rules didn't change all the time. It was circumstances around me and people around me. And now I have hope, whereas before I was like, it doesn't matter what you do, so you might as well do it big,
Well, so...
I'm not trying to be silly.
No, I got it. I'm with you. Sandy, I'm with you 100%. So for me, I want to circle back to the hellfire and brimstone for just a second, okay? Because I made a comment that elicited a response, because I think people can relate to it, the fact that a lot of us grew up in that hellfire and brimstone church. Okay, I want to say two things about that. And the first one is I don't want to disparage it. And I say that because my grandfather was one of the best hellfire and brimstone preachers I ever heard. He saved a lot of people out of sheer fear. I tell you, I will tell you, and I've said this, I've told the story before in the chapel class, but I remember I heard his conversion story sermon that he preached at our tiny little church in Nashville at one point, and it was so hellfire and brimstone. I was one of the many that went forward to respond and prayed for grace for my sins. I was 9. And it was just like, I need prayers, because he was so effective in his hellfire and brimstone approach. I say that because there's an element that we need to balance, right? I don't like the big pendulum swings. I don't like going from one extreme to the other extreme. The other extreme is that we don't ever mention the consequence of sin. And I think churches in our modern culture have done that. I think we have been so committed to grace, which is a good thing to be committed to, don't get me wrong. I think we've been so committed to making the message easy to hear and make it enjoyable and comfortable that at times, from pulpits and in classes, we want to avoid the consequences of sin conversation because it's icky. Or because it's going to make people uncomfortable or nervous. And so I say that because I don't want to disparage the hellfire and brimstone approach, because it was very effective when it was effective. Having said that, it doesn't have a ton of traction now, and there's a reason for that. When you talked about the rules changing. The rules changed because for a long time, and I think a lot of different fellowships are guilty of this. I'll only speak for the Church of Christ because that's what that's what I grew up in. But yeah, we've had a tendency to lean into our own interpretations and to our when the rules change, it's not because God's rules change, it's because we changed how we project it and how we. So I say that because there's room for all of these things in the conversation, but I do think now. Well, so let me ask the second part of that question. The second part of that question is, how does that impact our viewing God as a cosmic killjoy, our viewing God as being judgment and judgment alone? How does that change our? Let me ask this question more specifically. How does it change the way you interpret His Word? How does it change the way you respond to the Bible? Maybe that's a rhetorical question. So let me try to answer it as best I can. If you are coming at this from the outside, if you are not raised the way your kids are being raised, your kids are hearing these messages, your kids are getting hopefully a bigger understanding of what grace is, and a bigger understanding of what judgment is, a bigger understanding of what God is. I'm hoping that that's happening in your home. But if you didn't grow up that way, if you're in your 30s and hearing these things for the first time, and you get this picture of God as the cosmic killjoy who has a set of rules, and if you step outside of those rules, it's judgment and judgment alone. The easiest way to avoid that is just to dismiss the entire thing. The easiest way to avoid that judgment is to just walk away from it and to walk away from the Bible as a whole. So we need to be very cautious in how we respond to these things, especially with our kids. I promise you this. If you are raising children in this environment, they are going to go through a stage. I'm checking to make sure I'm still recording, yes. You're going to have to go through a stage with kids where they, at the young phase of life, they embrace these things fully. But my guess is most of you will experience through the teen years and into the 20s, there'll be a time of pushback, a time of challenge, a time of, do we really believe this? And I want you to not be afraid of it. That's okay. It's a good thing. It's a valuable thing. I've said for a really long time that if you have not struggled with your belief, if you've not struggled with the depth of it, then you're probably not thinking about it too intentionally. And I would encourage you to do that. It's hard to think about this and not question it. It's okay for your kids to do that, but I want you to be able to respond when you have kids in their teens and 20s who will tell you that their rejection of faith or their rejection of God is a rejection of this person, this set of restricting rules. And it's just meant to keep us chained to authority. And where it's to keep us from being free and from being happy. You're going to get some of that. Yep, Sarah, what do you got?
So I grew up and grown from the Church of Christ, and I grew up in the church that really, they didn't talk about sin, so you just kind of glazed over it.
Okay.
But the seed was planted, and I rebelled in my later teen years and into my 20s, and I was saved and baptized at 30. And
Wow.
so the seed was planted.
Yeah.
So even if your teens do go through that, which I'm so curious, the seed's still planted.
Absolutely.
And he says, raise up Tyler when he goes, when he's old, it's better for him. Start raising.
Growth is hard. Growth is hard, and growth requires analysis and intellectual growth, there's a large part of what we're talking about. This intellectual growth requires challenge, and it requires questioning. And so the idea that we need to be okay with it, and we need to be comfortable in it, and you need to join them in it. I will tell you this, one of the best gifts that my father ever gave me. My dad, the Church of Christ preacher, who was spent his entire life with us trying to instill these values in us. But at 17, which was the smartest I've ever been in my life. I'm sure those of you with teenagers can relate. 17, smartest I've ever been. And when I told him that none of this made sense to me. That now that as an adult at 17, as an adult now that I'm a responsible, mature adult, none of this makes sense, and I think it's crazy that we're the ones who think that we're right. And his response to that was, okay, great. What do you want to know? Who do you want to talk to? Where else do you want to visit? And we had a 6-month-long exchange of him sending me to places where I could have conversations with people with different faith backgrounds, which is a very weird thing to do. And my response was, okay, it turns out, after asking a lot of questions, starting to think this thing you've been telling me for 17 years may have a little more ground to stand on than I was giving it credit for. I don't know how it would have gone differently had he been angry and had he tried to prevent me from asking those questions. All right, I was watching the other day, and it's weird because we were about to have this conversation. I was watching, flipping through the channels, which is an old sentence, isn't it? It wasn't really. That's a weirdly old sentence. We don't have internet at our house, so I can't stream, so we have to have TV. So I got to one of those infomercial things on accident because it's just where the TV was on when I turned it on. And there was a George Carlin special. And I turned it on right at the part where he was saying that Christians want you to believe that there's this invisible man watching over us. And if you don't do exactly what he wants, he's going to send you into fire for all eternity. But he also loves you. And that was the punchline, was that he also loves you. And the reason that struck me was because it felt like, first of all, an obvious gross misunderstanding or misrepresentation of what God is. But it also struck me because I think there's a lot of people in our culture who feel that way, who feel that that paradox can't exist, that judgment and love can't exist together. So I want to give you, when you get those questions, how can a loving God punish us for not believing? How can a loving God punish us? You're going to get those questions from your teenagers. And if you've got 5, 6, 7, 8-year-olds, you're probably not having these conversations yet. If you are, check their browser history because something weird's happening. But more than likely in the teenage years, you're going to get questions about how can a loving God blank? How can hell exist in the context of a loving God? It's a good question for people to ask. It's a really good question for people to ask. I'm going to give you, it's just my answer. You're welcome to do all the digging you want, but I do encourage you to have an answer to that question. My answer to that question is it's God giving you what you ask for in this life. It's God giving you what you show him that you want. If in this life, if you make clear that you want God, that you desire his presence, which is what he's hoping, that he's thrilled to give you that in eternity. However, if you make clear in this life that you don't want God, you don't want his presence, and you want to be separate and apart from him, it breaks his heart, but he's willing to give you that too. And that's a choice that you make. That's not a choice that God is making out of judgment. Now, I realize that the semantics involved in that last part, we're maybe I'm softening the word judgment more than I should. But if we're talking to teenagers and talking to young people, the idea that judgment and punishment exists not as judgment and punishment alone, but exists as a choice on behalf of those who are on the receiving end of it. It's the message you try to give your kids. How often do you try to articulate to them, I didn't punish you, you punished you. You knew what the consequences to your behavior were. We talked about this ahead of time, and you chose to do something that you know I don't want you to do. Of course there's consequences. Those are really good conversations to have with your kid. All right, so the main point of this opening conversation that's taken 25 minutes is that how we understand God's rules and the nature of them matter. How we understand the context of a God who gives us instructions really matters. So I want to focus for just these last few minutes on the rules themselves. So take a look at Exodus chapter 20. I'm going to begin reading in verse 1, and we are going to go through the section of the Ten Commandments. This is what your kids are in today. We want to leave today with some conversations we can have. So I'm going to begin in verse 1. And God spoke all these words. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make yourself an image in the form of anything in heaven above, or on the earth beneath, or in the waters below. You shall not bow down to them or worship them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punishing the children for the sin of the parents to the 3rd and 4th generation of those who hate me, but showing love to 1,000 generations of those who love me and keep my commandments. You shall not misuse the name of the Lord your God, for the Lord will not hold anyone guiltless who misuses his name. Remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the 7th day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you, nor your son or daughter, nor your male or female servant, nor your animals, nor any foreigner residing in your towns. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them, but he rested on the 7th day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. Honor your father and mother, so that you may live long in the land that the Lord your God is giving you. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not give false testimony against your neighbor. You shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, or his male or female servant, his ox or his donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor. Okay, at times I think we leave this biblical account at God gave the 10 Commandments, here they are, and then we get to the part where Moses breaks them, and there's the incident with the Israelites, which we may get to today, we may not. But I want to pause for just a second, and I want to focus on the commandments themselves. I want to be sure we understand what they are, and be sure we talk about why they matter. I want to remind you again that God is not a cosmic killjoy. That is a misunderstanding of who God is and who He designed us to interpret Him to be. These weren't given. These rules, these 10 commandments, were not given to the Israelites to keep them from having fun. They were also not given to the Israelites as a means to get them into salvation. Remember, this is already a redeemed people. This is a group of people who have been rescued from captivity. These commandments came on the tail end of that, not on the way prior to that. This wasn't a prerequisite. The Israelites were given these instructions. They were given for their benefit. The 10 Commandments were instructional for how the Israelites could build and maintain a healthy relationship with God and healthy relationships with each other. The 10 Commandments were meant to prevent the souls and the hearts of the Israelites from rotting away, and they can certainly still be informative to us in the same way. So let me ask a modern, relevant 2021 question. From the list of the 10 Commandments that you see in front of you in your Bibles, which ones do you see our culture today particularly struggling with? What do you see as being the most problematic today in our culture?
Coveting.
Keep talking, David. That's where my brain went to, but go ahead.
Well, we have a comparison. Everybody, you compare what you have, what I have,
Yeah.
you have, what you have, you
Yeah.
have, you can't have what I have, that kind of thing. And then, of course, the adultery stuff, and, everybody's got to one up each other and things. So, I'm not saying everyone, but that culture,
Oh, I got you.
that thing,
Yeah.
the competitiveness about that
Right.
is defining your success.
Yeah. Well, and so it was something I want to pause on for a second, because I think you're 100% correct. But I think it also speaks to human nature, that these do not covet had to be told to the Israelites. It's not. This is a human nature problem. It's a human condition problem. The culture we're in now capitalizes on it better than any culture in history. So I've talked for a long time. You guys know my social media. If you don't know my social media feelings, I have strong ones. I did a lot of clinical research in social media and its relationship and its impact on people and relationships. It's not great. But what our culture does now, there's always been this tendency. You go back to when we were kids. Those of us who the internet wasn't around for, and it's weird, the longer I teach the adult classes, more and more people grew up in the internet age who are in those classes. But some of you remember not knowing the word Google, that being a nonsensical word. So for those of you who can relate to that time where you had to watch the show when it came on, otherwise you missed it, that's who I'm talking to for just a minute. There's always been a tendency when we saw other people's things that were better than ours, or there's always been a tendency to compare. That's a human nature problem. The difference was, in the past, for you to see your neighbor's redone bathroom, you had to be in that bathroom. Now you just have to be on your phone. And it's really easy. And then we've created this marketplace, this digital marketplace, whose sole business model is getting you to kind of feel bad about yourself enough to keep scrolling and keep digging, to get you to compare your life to the fictitious things you see on. I see I'm ranting. You get David's right. Just go with David's answer. I'm getting on to any other 10 commandments that we struggle with in today's culture. Coveting absolutely is one of them. What else?
Well, I'm going to throw another one in there, the Sabbath thing. So I don't use an example that we all very guilty of.
Okay.
Where it's talking about your neighbors. You're not supposed to work, right? But when we get out of church,
Yeah.
people leave here and go to a restaurant.
Yeah,
And those people are working.
they are. They're working. Not Chick-fil-A. They're
We're
blessed and holy.
supposed to be an example. And then,
Okay.
I've always struggled with that.
I know. Well,
It's a small thing,
Right.
but in the culture, though,
yeah.
look at how far it's gone.
Will.
Now, when I grew up in my town, everything shut down on Sundays.
Yeah.
Everything shut down on Sundays.
Well, no, I'm with you. It's interesting because I want to talk about Old Covenant and New Covenant, but we'll go back to that.
Go ahead.
Okay. What else? Mark? What do you got?
I think it's easy for our culture to struggle with the very first thing that God mentions, which is putting other gods before me.
Uh-huh.
Because in our culture, we don't think of things gods. And we might not build a golden calf, but there are
Right.
things that we worship
Yep.
in our culture, in our society. We put our trust in, we put our hope in, and we completely ignore.
Yep.
And so everything else that happens in our culture is because we are ignoring the one true God,
Mhm.
the one who did all these things for us.
Mark, I couldn't agree more. That is literally the first note that I made to myself in which ones we struggle with in our culture was putting no other gods before me. It's something that has become abundantly clear to anyone who's paying attention. Now, I think this has been true for a long time, but in 2021, now, you look back over the last 2 years, 4 years, 8 years, I don't know. I picked 2 because it seems really, really clear now. Everyone's religious, just not everyone's aware of what they're worshiping. But the idea that we have this part of our DNA that is meant to seek God. There's an apologetic here that we could spend a lot of time on, but the idea that we were designed to seek God, we were designed to seek truth, we were designed to seek meaning, we were designed to attach to something bigger than ourselves, and if we don't do that in the right place, we'll do it somewhere else. And we've created lots of gods in this culture. It worries me, and it worries me for having young kids that we've turned politics in this culture into a new religion. And I know it's always kind of been this way, but the last few years it's different than I've ever seen it. And it worries me because we're using religious language. And in religious language, good is good and evil is evil, and there's no compromise. And that scares me. Yes, I 100% agree with you, Mark. We've turned gods into a lot of things. Anything else? Anything else jump out at you?
Number, I guess, the 16, you shall not give false testimony against your neighbor.
Yeah.
Media, political decisions, prejudice.
That's what I'm saying.
Not checking the truth out, not finding out, assuming.
Oh, redefining it.
people, you know.
Yeah, we're not checking it out, especially if it's going to push against the thing you were trying to say. Yeah, yes. It's a very weird moment we're in, isn't it? And it's weird that you talk about media. It's weird to me how many of the media outlets we find do it just out in the open. Say things that are demonstrably false and are easily disproven, but it doesn't matter because the headline's all that counts, and the narrative is what matters. Yeah. Again, we could rant about this a lot. I want to. There's one more I wanted to focus on before we get to the conclusion here. Misusing the name of God. I think. Were you given the message of this particular commandment of don't take the Lord's name in vain as don't say, oh my G-O-D? Okay, that's how we all interpreted that. Okay, that's sure. But I think there's a much broader and much deeper understanding of misusing the name of God. There are a lot of politicians and a lot of cultural leaders who misuse the name of God when they attempt to invoke it to support their ideology or their agenda or something that they're pushing. When you are pushing something not from God and you use God to do it, I believe that is misusing the name of God. If you're looking for votes and your faith only comes out when it's politically advantageous, or when if you're looking for support for a political or social movement and invoking the name of God, we need to be clear. I don't care what side of the aisle you fall on, that's a misuse of the name of God. All right. Let's move on here. Let's see. Similar to our kids, we don't always like or understand why God tells us to do things. But we need to understand that they are for our benefit. Now, I want to touch, we have 5 minutes left. And in these last 5 minutes, I'm not going to read it, but we are going to be in Exodus 32 and 33. Because after the Israelites are given the 10 Commandments, there is this exchange that many of you will probably be familiar with. If you're not, the people get tired of waiting. And so while Moses is getting the 10 Commandments, in the 40 days it takes for this to happen, the impatient Israelites decide that, well, he's probably dead. That's kind of inferred in here. He's probably dead. Who knows? He's gone. Who knows what's happened to him? So we better get a god quickly. So they melt down all their gold, and then they make a cow to worship. Which is, if you think about the context of this, that God has just taken them out of Egypt, out of captivity. The plagues are what accomplished this, and within 40 days, they're like, nope, we got to move on. Cows. That is an insane jump to make, and it's a fast jump to make. I do want to read from Exodus 32 for just a second. The reason I want to read from it is because there's an exchange that takes place that is a little bit funny and is really informative for us as Christians today, right? So Moses asks Aaron. Moses is getting the 10 Commandments. Aaron is talking to people, and it's Aaron who they give their complaints to. To Aaron, they say, we don't know what happened to Moses. So we got to do something. And then Aaron is the one who is involved. Now keep in mind who Aaron is. Aaron Aaron has gotten instruction from God. He's gotten instruction from Moses. He was with Moses as they was freeing the Israelites. This is not a passing, he didn't just show up, right? This is a guy in a leadership position who absolutely knew better than to do what happened. So let's read in verse 22. This is Aaron explaining himself to Moses. Do not be angry, my Lord. Which, by the way, when you start a sentence with don't be mad, whatever's coming is about to make you mad. So, don't be angry, my Lord, Aaron answered. You know how prone these people are to evil. Do you see the backpedaling? Do you see the smoke coming off of the wheels as he's backpedaling? You know these people are prone to evil. They said to me, make us gods who will go before us. As for this fellow Moses who brought us up out of Egypt, we don't know what's happened to him. So I told them, whoever has any gold or jewelry, take it off. Then they gave me the gold, and I threw it into the fire, and out came this calf. I want to pause on how hilarious that sentence is. We threw the gold into the fire, and then I don't know what happened. It's a cow. Out came a calf. It's just perfect. I don't know. What do you want me to do? The people were complaining, and then there's this calf. I was just here. That's basically what he's telling Moses. Moving on to verse 25. Moses saw that the people were running wild and that Aaron had let them get out of control and so became a laughing stock to their enemies. What's happening in this moment is vital for our modern culture, and it's where I want to end this conversation today. Groupthink is a shockingly powerful thing. None of us think we're prone to it, but we are. All of us are prone to it. We will do things in a group we would never do individually. We will permit things to be said, to be done, and to be carried out in a group that we would never, ever do individually face-to-face to another human being. Culturally, I think this is as true today as it's ever been. None of us believe that we all think we're the ones who it can't touch. No, not me. I mean, I get it. When the mob gets all riled up, not me, I step back. Look at Aaron. Aaron knew exactly what God expected from these people. Aaron knew what was expected of him, what all it took to get him to bend what he knew was right was a group of people telling him to do it. Groupthink is really, really powerful. I want you to consider that when you're online. I want you to consider that when you're watching TV, when you get drawn into the division that this culture is peddling for ratings, views, or political power. There is a division that has been created in our culture, and they're desperately wanting you to pick a side. They're wanting you to pick a side and fight the other ones, because as long as you're on whatever side this particular outlet or entity represents, they've got you hook, line, and sinker, and you'll continue to go back to them. Consider this when you're talking to your kids, and help them understand what groupthink is. Help them understand that when groups of people get together, it's very easy for it to go off the rails quickly. The media isn't trying to give you information, they're trying to tell you what to believe. That's an important thing for us to understand. Those who blindly swallow it are sucked into a cultural groupthink. You have kids today that are learning about the Ten Commandments. You have kids today that most of them probably got to this part of the story, where God's people quickly, all together, reject what they've been told to be and reject what they were told to do and start worshiping other gods. I want you to identify a couple of things. Number one, it's really easy to fall into that trap. They don't think they will. They will be at school and feel the power of groupthink at times. They will be in their neighborhoods with their friends and will feel the power of groupthink at times. So will you. You will be with your friends, you will be with your communities, you'll be in your online communities, and you will be sucked in to the mentality of mob thinking. I want to encourage you today to push back on that. I want you to recognize Aaron's role. Recognize Aaron had all the tools required. The one thing he didn't do was stand up to the groupthink when it got out of control. So I want to focus on Aaron's role. I want you to focus on why this stuff matters. And I want you to have a conversation with your kids today about how groupthink and mob mentality, how that works. Use the word groupthink, not mob mentality. Groupthink's a little easier for kids. But talk to them about what it's like to be in a group of people who are saying things or doing things that they know are wrong and why that's such a big struggle. I'm over time, so I'm going to close this down with this. God is not a cosmic killjoy. His instruction is for our benefit, and groupthink is stronger than you believe it to be. We will pick up this conversation next week. If you are following along with me in the story itself, we're going to be in chapter 6. But we'll begin having, we'll pick up the conversation next week. I'm going to close this out with a word of prayer, and then if you would, go get your kids and tell them I kept you too long. Gracious Father, Lord, we come to you grateful, honored, ecstatic, the opportunity that you give us to connect to you, the opportunity that you give us to pray and to be heard by you. Father, it is an honor to know that truth exists. Father, today we looked at a moment in your word that we wanted to be instructive for us today in this culture. Father, whether we hit the right notes or not, I pray that you would give us the ability to walk out of this classroom today with knowledge on how to take this moment and how to apply it to our lives and to our families and to our culture. Father, I pray today that you will give us the ability to be a beacon for you, a light for you in a culture that so desperately needs you. Father, I pray that you'll give us the strength to withstand the groupthink of the culture around us and to think about you before we think about anything else. Father, I pray for the lives of the families in this room. I pray for the hearts, the minds, and the souls of the kids in our kids' wing. And I pray that these lessons that they're getting now will plant the seed that will eventually grow into the tree that you will have them be. Father, I ask these things through your Son. Amen. Thanks, guys.